Hi, hey, hi, hi. This is not going to be an argument video or anything terribly substantive. Just a bit of housekeeping. So some clarifications, updates, comments, observations, a mixed bag of mostly unrelated items that I just want you to know. So yeah, jumping right in. Even though it's kind of a running joke at this point that I'm like the least prolific YouTuber in the history of YouTube, I'm actually very active on Twitter. And I have been this whole time for years now. I never really went anywhere. I just sort of changed mediums. But only recently did I create a Twitter handle just for all things theoretical bullshit. And it's just at theoretical BS. And that's it. And I cannot tell you what a good move that was, separating the philosophy and the religion stuff from, my acting career and everything else. The problem is that not a lot of people know this. I think I have like 50 something thousand subscribers on YouTube, but 1,000 followers on Twitter, on that Twitter account. And the truth is, I would like to have more. I have the luxury of being able to do this purely for pleasure whenever I have the time. I'm not monetized. I don't make my living this way. I don't need clicks to put food on the table. But I do want to stay engaged, and I want to continue the conversations that are started by my YouTube videos. For one, because it keeps me sharp, but I also think it's just a good principle to give people access to me if they want to challenge me or correct me or ask me a question or whatever. And I found that the easiest way for me to do that has been on Twitter, because I can tweet and live my life at the same time. I don't need to put everything on pause for 10 hours to make a YouTube video. So anyway, follow me on Twitter is what I'm getting at. Again, it's at theoretical BS, and we'll catch up over there. Okay, so a few things to say about my last video on the modal ontological argument. First, I got a lot of really, really cool, smart, thoughtful comments from you guys, which I really appreciated. A few of you even pointed out to me that, contrary to my example, there is this non-Euclidean geometry called taxicab geometry, with which you can draw a circle that is not round. So who knew? Some of the comments I didn't appreciate so much were the ones with a kind of unearned dismissiveness to them, like, oh my God, why are you even wasting your time on this, Scott? This argument is so stupid, I could refute it in my sleep. Like, no, you couldn't. Not in your sleep, and especially not with that attitude. That is textbook Dunning-Kruger effect right there. I mean, there's a reason you can't run the exact same argument to prove the existence of a perfect pizza. And trust me when I say there is no shortage of Christian apologists on the internet who are salivating at the chance to explain to you why. That said, in that video, I made a really egregious mistake that caused a lot of confusion in the comments. And I just want to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So here's what it was. At 12 minutes and 27 seconds, I put my objection to the argument into a syllogism that had premises that contradicted each other. I did not mean to do that. And some of you were trying so hard to interpret me as charitably as possible, like maybe I'm going for a paradox of entailment kind of thing where, a valid conclusion automatically follows from any two contradictory premises. Nope, it wasn't that. I'm not that clever. It was just a fuck up. So here's what the syllogism should have been. Premise one, by definition, if God exists, then the proposition God does not exist is self-contradictory. Premise two, the proposition God does not exist is not self-contradictory. Conclusion, therefore, by definition, God does not exist. And, I put that correction into a footnote in the video's description box, but I realized nobody looks at that. So, for one thing, future reference, always read the description on my videos. But there's just no way to edit a YouTube video after it's already been posted, at least not in that way. without losing all the comments and likes and views and statistics. And honestly, I don't care about the statistics and views and stuff, but I do care about the comments, and I want to preserve those. So what I might do, maybe, just for the sake of posterity, because this will drive me crazy for the rest of my life, is make that video unlisted, right? So the only way you can watch it is if you have the link. Then upload the video all over again, everything else exactly the same, except the new version will have the correction in place for that syllogism. And then in that new video's description box, I'll put a little explanation along with a link to the old video, which is unlisted, so that anybody who wants to see the old comments has access to it. So that's one idea. What else? I got some grief for only talking about logical possibility and not metaphysical possibility, and that's not true. So I did address the idea of metaphysical possibility. I just made a very deliberate choice not to use the phrase metaphysical possibility or metaphysical necessity, because I genuinely think all that does is cause confusion. So if you remember the part where I talked about water and H2O, well, that is considered an example of metaphysical necessity. It's metaphysically necessary that water is H2O. And I think I called it logically necessary because my whole argument is that it reduces to that, but that is offered as an example of metaphysical necessity. But that's weird, right? Because I was still talking about how the negation water is not H2O is a self-contradiction, which sounds a whole lot like logical necessity, but that, yes, exactly, which is why metaphysical necessity is often referred to as broad logical necessity. What I'm arguing, which is the same as what Richard Swinburne is arguing in the paper I cited, is that metaphysical necessity always reduces to logical necessity. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Now, I should say that I have encountered people who, whether correctly or not, use the term metaphysical necessity to mean an even weaker modality than that. So there's not even a hidden contradiction in denying a metaphysically necessary truth or being on this view. There's no contradiction at all. We're just talking about something that lies somewhere between the laws of physics and the laws of logic. Just somewhere in there. We don't know where. And the problem with that is that it becomes such a nebulous and poorly defined concept that there is no test for whether something is or isn't metaphysically necessary. It's the wild, wild west. You think it is, I think it isn't. It's a draw. I mean, and I addressed this as well in the video, perhaps all too hastily, when I said this just makes the ontological argument's first premise trivially easy for any rational person to reject. Now, it's also easy for a rational person to accept that first premise, but the point is that the argument becomes useless as a tool for convincing anyone of anything they don't already believe. So it's not really an argument anymore in any meaningful sense, is it? Here's an interesting one. Some people said I was begging the question with my 2 + 2 = 4 example. And the idea here is that to say that a proposition is true necessarily is to say that its negation entails a contradiction. That's what it means for a statement to be necessary. And so when I claim that the negation of 2 + 2 = 4 entailing a contradiction is what makes it necessary, I'm just stating a tautology, right? I'm just saying 2 + 2 = 4 being necessary is what makes 2 + 2 = 4 necessary. I've added nothing of value to the conversation. And I guess what I want to say here is that if that were true, I wouldn't have needed to make the video, right? I wouldn't have needed to convince anyone that this is the only way to make sense of necessity. If everyone agreed, if Plantinga agreed that calling something necessary is synonymous with calling its negation self-contradictory, well then it would just be undeniable that all the argument is doing is defining God into existence. So clearly, having a self-contradictory negation is not essential to the definition of necessity simpliciter. I mean, maybe you could say it's essential to the definition of logical necessity, but I want to make sure that we're not confusing two different kinds of definitional move here. One is to say Here's what we mean by necessity. Now, does the statement 2 plus 2 equals 4 fit those criteria? Oh, yes, it does. Okay, so 2 plus 2 equals 4 is necessary. Another is to say, what I mean by 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a statement that's necessary. So being necessary is an essential property of the statement 2 plus 2 equals 4. You see the difference? It's one thing to say that God meets the criteria of a necessary being. It's another thing to define God as a necessary being. The former is what's called a synthetic truth, and the latter is an analytic truth. Okay, last thing, the goddamn Trump video. So in November of 2016, I made a short video in which I expressed my anxieties about a Donald Trump presidency. And I promised that after a couple years, I would take inventory. And, if he turned out to be a great president, I would admit that I was wrong. And, oh my God, that seems so naive in retrospect. I mean, if you're at all familiar with me and how my brain works and what my ethics and values are and how I think about determining what's true and what's not, then it should be obvious that I think this presidency has been orders of magnitude worse than I ever thought possible in ways that I never thought possible. It's become clear that until this chapter in history is closed, anything I say about it will be incomplete because the guy keeps outdoing himself. So I'm sorry for breaking that promise. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But there's no way I'm going to touch this yet. But if you really want a sense of my reactions in real time to what's been happening the last few years, just scroll through all my tweets about it. And that would be my @Clifton'sNotes account, not the new Theoretical BS account. Okay, that's about it. On a personal note, I have a son who just turned 4 the day before yesterday. And needless to say, that's been one of the reasons it's so hard for me to make YouTube videos. But despite all that, I think I'll keep him. Thank you so much for bearing with me. You're good sports, all of you, and until next time.